V-cuts, U-cuts, also called shield cuts, um, sort of a convex cut, looks like a bird in flight to me. There's leaf cuts and diamond cuts. So I'm just going to show you some different things. I've set up these cylinders. They're tall. This one is probably, okay, I'll measure it just so you can see how much they change. This one's 11 inches. This one's about 10 inches, just so you can see how short they get after you alter them. All right, so I was thinking I'd go in order. I'm just going to set this one aside. Um, so I have one that I've made into kind of a square, and I was thinking I would do diamond cuts and see what I got. All right, so I'm just going to wing it because it's a quick demo. So I'm going to cut a shape, and if you really wanted these to be symmetrical, you could cut patterns out of paper. So here's my first shape. This is a V cut. I want to see what it does. Well, it brings it in considerably. Okay, so I'm going to trace this just so I can get approximately the same thing on each side. Now, when there was a video you guys watched at the start of this assignment that showed how important it was to reinforce all of these cuts and to fill the divots because I'm not beveling them. So I just want to make sure that you know that I'm just doing this for a quick demo so you can see what happens, but I'm not reinforcing them in a way that would make them strong or last. So this is soft slab, really wiggly. One more. Okay. All right. So let's just see what this would do. So it's going to like slip and score a little bit. Always wiggle, 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 wiggle together. Make sure it locks. Wiggle, 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 wiggle together so it locks. Wiggling again. Whoops, I didn't remove enough of this. Hang on. Yeah. Rescore. Okay. I'm pushing them together. I'm going to rotate again. And okay. So it's brought it all in, kind of like a square shape. I could also take my rib and I can work these together so they stay sharp. I think I will do that on this one. So this one I've just made 4 cuts, 4 of the same cuts, not very exciting. Kind of like what it did. And I'm not sure what I'm going to do with this yet. Maybe I'll end up flipping it upside down. But right now, I've got to set it aside so you can see that I've got my sort of squared off little bowl and it angles in. So I'm going to move this aside and I'm going to do a different one. Okay. So let me see what happens with, this is a nice large one. So I'm going to do diamond cuts on this one. Okay, I'm not sure, I've never really done diamond cuts. So I'm looking at it bird's eye view and I'm kind of making a notch just so I can make sure the cuts are exactly opposite each other in a kite shape. Let me do the wide part on top. And again, I could trace this out of paper and cut it out so that I could actually get a symmetrical pattern, but I don't want to do that. I'm just going to see what happens. And I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Now, I don't have to do the same type of cut on each side. Whoops, I should tell you that. I'm just going to use my knife to remember how far down to start the cut. So I marked it. And I'm going to rotate. Marked it. And here we go. Okay. Oops. Didn't cut all the way through here. All right. And I would slip and score. Slip, score, slip, score. Let's see what this does. Ooh, it's a sharper look. Okay. Let me turn it so you can actually see what happened. The profile, how it's brought it in. Let me do, so I would, work this together. This top part of thing's a little bumpy. Maybe I want it to stay bumpy, or maybe in this case, I might soften this one and paddle it. Okay, so that's a different shape. I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Slip and score. So all of these seams would have to be reinforced with a worm. And you've seen that Ed puzzle. If you don't remember how to do it, definitely watch it because your pieces aren't going to stay together if you don't do that. So I would reinforce them, and I'm going to paddle that one. All right, so this brought it in a lot. Okay, now again, I'm shaping it, right? I could decide later to flip it and cut more darts, in this. Maybe I will. Maybe I'll do a sort of swoopy bird dart on the top here. So I think of it as like, the way little kids draw seagulls, like kind of a bird in flight shape. See what this one does. Oh, it's a softer, rounder shape. So let me score. So you're going to just see what happens when you shape your slabs. It's kind of fun. So this is a divot right here, a gap. I would definitely need to fill this with some clay so that it would be like level on the top if I wanted to, maybe this would be the bottom, but I would need to figure out the top. So this is like the first stage, just seeing what happens, but I would have to figure out what I wanted to do with my base and figure out what I wanted to do with my lip for this assignment. So I'm just kind of starting the body of the pot right now. All right, so that's sort of the swoopy bird shape. You can see that it's more round than the V-shaped cuts I did on the squarish bowl. So it's like a very round thing. All right, so now I'm going to pick this up and put this aside, and I'll work on another one. All right, so we did 3 types of cups so far. Let's see. Let me do, this one's really tall. So it doesn't matter like what shape, like I made a lot of these into ovals, but you can, turn them into other shapes before you shape them. You might like better what happens. So if I've got a triangle and I cut on this edge, the triangle edge, I'm going to get something different than if I cut from here. So let's see what happens if I cut from the middle. I'm just going to take my rib, my hands on the inside, and I'm just going to make this a little more triangle-y. Put this one aside. You can also like paddle it a little bit. Okay, all right. I should say one more thing. My seam, when I'm cutting the darts, I try to avoid where my seam was. I try to remember where the beveled seam was, and I try not to cut on that same seam. Okay, so for this one, let me try a U-shaped cut. I was going to do it on the faces, but I really want to do it on this corner. Let me do it on the corners, and then I'll do it a different way on this one. Okay, so the U-shaped cut is just like a letter U. Or a shield. Some people call it a shield cut. That's a really big cut. So the size of your cut is going to change how much it alters the form. So if you make a narrower cut, it would make a narrower one. Let me just score and work the edges together. Aha, very different, right? What it did to the pot there. Let me make a smaller one over here on the other side just so you can see the difference. Maybe this time I'll do it right here. So this one is this size. I want to see what a smaller one does. So I'm tracing it lightly, and I'm going to cut this smaller. Pretend I slipped and scored, and then I got to work this together. Okay, so it's not as dramatic. You can see I'm going to flip it this way. It's more stable. So it brought it in. So it's like a notch and a notch, a notch and a notch. Maybe I should do a long V here. Um, Whoops. Okay, let me just see. So I really like Soft Slab. I think it's forgiving. I think it's kind of fun to not know exactly what you're going to get the first time you do it. But over time, you will get familiar with like what each alteration does. So now I've got, it's very slight and diagonal in. So you can see the negative space if I stand like this. I just brought it in a little. So I can always cut more, but you can't take, you can't go back and add that clay if you've taken it out. So that's another type of cut right there. All right, so I'm gonna move this one aside. So I've done leaf, bird in flight, shield or U, and V. Let me do, well, things don't have to be even a regular geometric shape. You know, what's nice about this soft slab is you can really stretch it like to infinity shape, see what you get before you cut your darts. Okay. I'm going to cut a leaf shape. I haven't done that one yet. A leaf shape is also called the double pointed V, and it's called the leaf shape because it kind of looks like a leaf. Okay. So if I, slipped and scored and worked it together, it sort of makes almost like a little waist in the pot. So all of these would have to be reinforced with a seam on the inside, and then I could choose to soften and paddle. It's like a little curve here. All right, so I'm doing that one. Now I'm going to put a bunch together. Okay, so I've got my oval. All right, so here we go. I'm going to combine a couple. All right, so the U shape. Work this one together. I'm going to score, work it together. So I'm kind of pressing it together. Brings it in. There's a point. I can leave it pointy or I can smush it. I think I'm going to make it into like a nose. Okay. So I'd have to reinforce this seam. Maybe I'll do this one. I'm going to do it the outside so you can see. A little worm of clay would get laid over the seam, and you'd put half of it to the left, half of it to the right, and you'd really spend some time working it together. I've got my hands too wet, and that makes the clay slimy, which is not very good. You don't really want to add water unless you absolutely need to. So on the seams, it's okay, but I don't want water to pool anywhere else. The exception would be probably the potter's wheel. Okay, so done a cut. It brought it in. Okay, so now I'm going to do 2 V cuts on the side. Oh, maybe I'll do, I'm going to do this sort of bird in flight cut instead. Alrighty. Cutting it up. It's like a weird pointy Y shape. If I hold it against my clothes, you can see better. Okay, I'm going to trace it. Actually, I'm going to flip it because when I went to the other side, it's opposite. There we go. Okay. Score, 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 score. Work it in. Work it in. Okay. I think I want to bring this back in a little. I'm going to do, another Y-shaped cut. Okay. Oh, I went too far. I made it a little narrower than I wanted. Okay, that's all right. It just comes down a little lower. I don't know if you can see that it comes down lower. I'm actually going to paddle it because I'm not happy with it. The paddle is your friend. And I think what I would do with this notch that I left that I don't want is I would just slip and score and kind of put back the V I took out. Now, that's a horrible seam. I am going to need to reinforce that, to make sure that that doesn't open up there. So I would just add that back in. You can get away with a lot more if you're using soft clay than you can with leather hard. There. Okay, so I kind of like the curve of that better. All right, so because I haven't really slipped and scored and wiggled, these are going to keep opening up a little bit on me. So you know. Okay, so I brought this in. So I was thinking I would kind of make a bear head. So I'm going to take away some on the side. Bring him in. You see how that brings his little body in? And then, of course, I would need to probably paddle that. Let me do another one. Okay. I'm not paying attention to making them symmetrical because I'm not really going to keep this. So I've got this little head. Okay. So the nice thing, too, about clay that's soft is if you draw in it, you can, like, push the clay out so parts stick out. And then, so what I'm going to do is the inside hand is pressing out and the outside hand is pressing in. So it kind of made like a little mouth shape. The clay's poofy. I love that about soft clay. I can do things like give them a belly button and make them look fat by pressing it on the inside. I can, it's just really fun. The soft clay is really fun because you can stretch things out. Let me give it some fur, just so you can see. So I made all these little lines, and when I push the clay out, they get wider, they open up. There. Okay, so hold it closer so you can see how they opened up a little bit. Well, I don't like the belly button soft clay. I can just soften it. Bear would probably not have a belly button. Well, no, I guess all mammals would. I just made the belly button smaller. It's soft clay. I'm happier. All right, so it would need, a top, right? And it would need a base. But there's one other thing I want you to know. It's a problem when people take slab and they cut a shape out and they just stick it on. It just screams slab. So what you should do is take your piece, and you can see that it's still wide enough, right? I have still surface to slip and score, but I want to taper the edges so that people don't look at it and immediately know, how that ear was built. So it will look a little more realistic if you take the edges and pinch and smooth them. And it's also compressing them a little bit too. So I'm pinching and smoothing, kind of like you did with your pinch pots. And then, ta-da. Okay, so that's it. That's my demo. Different ways to make cups.